This is pure architectural sorcery, perhaps the greatest Norman or Romanesque building in Europe. When William the Conqueror came here with his Norman armies after the Battle of Hastings, they wanted to impose their political as well as ecclesiastical might on Northumbria, on this part of northern England bordering Scotland. Because William thought of himself as a latter-day Roman king or Roman emperor, he wanted to build on a scale that the Romans built on. So this cathedral was built almost exactly to the same size and scale as Old St. Peter's in Rome. We call the style of this building Norman or Romanesque. Intriguingly, the Roman style it comes from is not directly from ancient Rome itself, but from Byzantium. The point is that this style had developed in the Eastern Roman Empire, and it came slowly back into Western Europe through Ravenna and then through the court of Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor in Aachen, in what's now Germany. It was that architecture that then moved its way across Normandy and came with William through into England and right up here into Northumbria. The heart of this new cathedral, its choir, its nave, its transepts, grew up remarkably quickly between 1093 and 1133. After that, it rose and grew over the next few hundred years, culminating in this great central tower, hundreds of feet above the River Wear, completed in 1500. That's just 40 years before Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries and great cathedrals like this. Durham, though, was special, and Henry was a little bit gentler with it than he was with other cathedrals and monasteries. Why is that? Well, the answer lies over there, and it's called Scotland. England was quite rightly fearful of invasion from north of the border, and from its very beginning, Durham Cathedral was always as much a place of worship as it was a fortress against the Scots.
This is a masterpiece because the proportion of this building, its form, is so right. And I wonder whether Guardian readers aren't responding to something that's quite difficult to put into words, but that is to do with a whole combination of factors: architecture, landscape, history, heritage, spirituality. All these things have gone into making this the wonderful building that it is.
But most of all, the thing that really characterises this period is that architectural leadership, innovation, lay firmly with the cathedrals. The 13th century was the age of the English cathedral. Collectively, I think, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the whole Middle Ages, of the whole of European civilization. This is certainly partially due to the inventiveness of English masons and designers, but it's also due to the extraordinary wealth of the English bishop. We saw last week how English taste in architecture tends towards the decorative, tends towards the busy and the elaborate. We looked at Durham and saw how the sort of noble simplicity of the early Anglo-Norman buildings became enmeshed in surface decoration, which you can see some of here. And in a sense, this is what happens to the English Gothic style. The changes which take place in the second generation of Norman churchmen can be seen most clearly at Durham Cathedral. Now, while the bones of Durham's design are familiar, the alternating compound and cylindrical piers are exactly the same as in Edward the Confessor's Abbey, something very important has changed here, because unlike what we've just seen at Winchester, the ground floor arcades are much, much taller than the arcades above that have been squeezed up. They've been reduced, they've been made much smaller, and they squeeze the clerestory up to the roof. Now, the naves of most of the early cathedrals had been roofed in timber. Here's Durham, and here is Ely, one of the early cathedrals you can go to, and you can see the equality in height between these arcades and the ground floor, the gallery and the clerestory, and this wooden roof. What happens at Durham is that a way was found of vaulting over the space with masonry and highlighting the intersections of the vault with stone ribs. And what this was a crucial step forward in style, because a flat timber roof broke up the unity of the space, while a vault, as you can see from what's on the screen, drew together all the elements into a coherent whole. But Durham's novelty is not only in its structure, although it is very novel, and it's novel in European sense in its structure. It is novel in its decoration. Because the eastern parts of the cathedral, which were built first, are very plain, but the nave, which was built after 1104, gets progressively more showy as it moves towards the west. The piers are cut with lozenges and zigzags, the arches are cut with chevrons, and the aisle walls are decorated with blank intersecting arcading that looks to me as if it's fallen straight out of an Anglo-Saxon manuscript.
Here at Durham we have one of the principal buildings erected at that time, and it was at the cutting edge of technology. It was begun in 1093. There had been some minor redevelopment of the claustral buildings prior to that, but this really was the first major exercise. As was the normal practice, they built the east end first, in this particular instance, to house the shrine of St. Cuthbert, and also to accommodate the monks within the choir area. The building took 40 years. The original Norman building, 40 years from the east end through to the west end. So how did they build this cathedral in so quickly, in a 40-year building period? Well, a lot of it was down to standardization and organization, something the Normans did bring to the building process in this country. And you can see the evidence of their efficiency, as it were, when you look at this distinctive patterning on the columns of this cathedral. The patterns were actually cut into the stones before they were laid, so they would have been cut in the workshops before they were laid. And we know that because there are places where the lining through of the pattern doesn't quite work across the joints, and they've had to sweeten in afterwards. Now, when they were cutting the stone at the workshop, the masons wanted to make sure they would get paid for it. And they marked the stones with these characteristic mason's marks. Each mason or team of masons had their own mark. And here we have examples of a double triangle here. We have a snowflake design here. And all sorts of different marks appear, and many of them repeated several times over. Looking at the Chapel of Nine Altars, you can see immediately how Norman architecture has now been totally superseded by 13th century Gothic architecture, and a shift from thinking of architecture as a wall with holes in to conceiving buildings as a stone framework around the glass. And that is the essence of the development from Norman architecture to the end of the medieval period. Here in the north window we have a further development of that idea of a stone framework supporting the glass. Modern analysis by computer has actually failed to prove that this window can stand up. Here under this polished limestone slab we have the remains of St. Cuthbert. And his bones, his remains, are the reason for Durham Cathedral being here in the first place. There is a legend associated with how the monks chose this site, which is St. Cuthbert's coffin became impossibly heavy to carry one evening. So they set it down, and during the night one of the monks had a vision, and in that vision St. Cuthbert said he wanted to be permanently buried on the Dunholm. The trouble is, the monks didn't know where or what the Dunholm was. Until the following morning they heard two milkmaids calling to each other. And one said, "Have you seen my cow anywhere?" And the other one replied, "Yes, it's on the Dunholm." So you have this wonderful image of a bunch of probably fairly elderly monks chasing a young milkmaid through the wooded headland, looking for this place, the Dunholm.
Building usually started at the east end, where Mass was celebrated. When that was finished, the church could be consecrated and put to use, followed by the transepts running north to south. The nave and the side aisles would follow. from foundations to finish might take less than 60 years, or as many as 200 if the money ran out.
It's a bit of a myth that the medieval cathedrals somehow designed themselves in a great communal outburst of religious energy without the help of what we would call an architect. In fact, he may not have been called an architect, but to create a structure of this ambition, you needed a man with skill, vision, and expertise, a man who knew what he was doing.
Those men were called master masons. They learned everything they knew on site, progressing from apprentice to stone carver. They travelled and made sketches of what they saw, adapting them for their own designs to put to the bishop. Very few medieval masons' plans or notebooks survive. Those that do show they knew geometry, not the theory that we understand today, but a geometry based on the complex manipulation of squares, circles and triangles to produce shapes and patterns in regular proportions. Proportion, ratio, symmetry. To the medieval mind, these were spiritual qualities. They reflected the harmony of creation, and medieval masons cared passionately about them. Some have claimed to spot mysterious messages and codes in the dimensions of medieval cathedrals. The number 144, for example, which refers to the number of those who will be saved in the book of Revelation.
All kinds of numbers that occur in the Bible pop up from time to time in cathedral architecture. These are mostly the ideas of churchmen. Much more common are the basic geometrical principles followed by the master masons. With a square and a circle and a diagonal, you can generate an entire cathedral.
In summary, it is clear that Durham Cathedral was built with sacred intentions and proportional geometry handed down through the ages.